Joe and Doug Show.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Joe and Doug Show. We're pumped that you're with us. It's a beautiful day here in Youngstown. We've been hanging out, enjoying ourselves. Joe's got his espresso. He's fresh off his freedom tour from Boston to Maine.
Oh, yeah.
And we're back in the seat. Today, we have a guest all the way from Israel here. A dear friend of mine, Rabbi Pesach Wolicki, is with us. And he and I met in 2016 in Efrat in Judea and Samaria. And we met doing a Bible study with a bunch of pastors and a rabbi in a room.
In a synagogue.
There's a joke here.
Yeah, it's
it's coming.
Yeah, and we had a great time, and he put his business cards out and said, hey, anybody want to connect with me? By all means, call me, contact me. I took a business card, and he's now spoken to the church several times. We've connected at a number of different events. And
I've spoken to your group when you came to Israel.
And everything in between. And so real quick, in 2 to 3 minutes, can you just give our audience a window into you, what you do, what you've done, who you are, passions, and then we'll dive into.
All right. So I'm a rabbi. I'm an Orthodox rabbi, meaning I'm not Messianic. I'm a Jew, an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. I live in Israel. But you can tell from my accent that I'm not originally from Israel. I was born in the States, left the U.S. when I was a baby. My family moved to Canada. My dad is also a rabbi, and my dad became the rabbi of a synagogue up in Montreal, where I was raised. I was raised in Canada.
But you were born.
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
Nice, homegrown.
Oh, well, my parents lived in Ohio for a grand total of 2 years.
We're claiming
during that time, I was born here and left. So whatever that means, for a long time, Ohio was just like this odd fact about me that I didn't even really relate to, because I didn't even know what Ohio looked like, but I happened to be born in Ohio.
On the back of the baseball card, it says
exactly. Born Cleveland, Ohio. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
So then you were raised in.
So I was raised in Canada, and then as an adult, I moved to Israel. My whole family had moved to Israel. My parents moved to Israel even before me, before I finished college, and so I've lived in Israel for 27 years. Met my wife there. She's from Boston. And we have 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. One of my daughters, a big first for me, 2 weeks ago today, one of my daughters got married. Beautiful. So I have a married child,
Nice.
which is a new stage in life. So I've earned my gray hair, I think. And let me tell you about what I do. I think that's of greatest interest. So I'm not a conventional rabbi. I don't have a synagogue that I lead. I spent most of my adult life I've spent in Jewish education, mainly teaching Talmud and other arcane things to people outside of the Jewish community, running a small seminary, what we call a post-high school seminary. It's very common in the Orthodox Jewish world. A common rite of passage is that students from all over the world, when they finish their high school education, before they go off to college or whatever else they're going to do, they'll go off to Israel and spend a year or two just immersed in Jewish studies, in what we call Torah, in Talmud, in Bible studies, theology, also touring the country, learning the language. A certain percentage of those students end up staying in Israel, serving in the army, and end up making their lives there. Others go back to wherever they came from. But it's just kind of in that gap year or gap 2 years between high school and college, kind of strengthening themselves spiritually and in their relationship to the faith. So I ran one of these seminaries, a pretty advanced one academically. Again, we were very into the Talmud and Aramaic and ancient texts. That's what we did. It wasn't, had no relationship to what I do next. But all that time, what was really burning in my heart and was really something that I was very, very passionate about is the idea of building a closer relationship, a closer spiritual relationship between Jews and Christians. And in 2015, I closed that seminary with my partner. We closed the seminary. We went our separate ways, and I went full time into Jewish-Christian relations. And what that means is going around to churches, speaking, doing Bible studies, speaking about Israel. Right now, I'm involved in a very interesting project, very important project of building stronger relationships between the Jewish people in Israel and Christian seminaries and Christian colleges, so that there's more awareness of Israel and more just cross-pollination and relationship between our faiths. And I also write. I've written one book. I'm working on my next book, and I write articles, all in the space of the Jewish-Christian relationship and the overlap and the shared values between Jews and Christians. That's what I do.
Okay, so now kind of squaring the differences between the Jewish religion.
Well, I wouldn't say
Christian?
squaring the differences.
Okay.
Meaning, squaring the differences implies that we're kind of ironing them out.
Okay.
No, that's not what we're doing at all. What we're doing more is we're not even so focused on the differences. It's more embracing the overlap between us, because Jews and Christians. If I say like, wow, I had a rabbi in the studio today. We're talking to a rabbi. And so people tend to focus on what's different. And you start immediately. Your mind goes to the things that I believe that you don't believe, and the things that you believe that I don't believe, and what makes us different.
We can have an argument if we go back and forth on that.
Right, exactly. In other words, but that's where the mind immediately goes when you make someone different. And when it comes specifically to Judaism and Christianity, there is so much overlap in what we believe, in terms of what we share. We share the Bible, meaning the Hebrew Bible, what you call the Old Testament, is shared. We share faith in the God of Israel, faith in the prophecies in that Bible, the values that come from the Bible. And increasingly today, we share cultural battles. I really believe that what's going on today is a fierce battle for the soul of Western civilization, for whether or not the Judeo-Christian, biblically based set of values and mindset, which has underpinned Western civilization, is going to continue to underpin Western civilization. And that's a battle where Christians who believe in God and believe in the Bible, and Jews who believe in God and believe in the Bible, are actually allies, whether they embrace it or not. I mean, I'm trying to get them to realize more that we have to embrace it. That's a big focus for me these days, is like, let's wake up to the fact that we are in this fight together. Now that's a kind of negative spin on the relationship, shared enemies, but it speaks to something very positive, because this is not shared enemies because the same guy with a knife is trying to attack you and the two of us. This is shared enemies because we share a value system. And hey, wait a second, for a long time we've been looking at each other kind of sideways, not seeing each other as allies. But hold on a second. The challenges that Christians have raising their children in a culture that in many ways is hostile to a biblical worldview, that's something that Jews grapple with in the same way that Christians do. Issues of how public policy affects the moral fabric of society. That's something Jews and Christians share. And when I say Jews and Christians, I'm an Orthodox Jew. Our belief in the Bible is a traditional belief in the Bible as the Word of God, and we believe in God, a God who acts in our lives and speaks through our lives and controls history. We believe that biblical prophecy is not just some sort of ancient metaphors, but that it's real. So this is another big aspect of what I do, because most Jews in America, the vast majority of Jews in America, are what we would call Reform or Conservative or unaffiliated. Those are terms that refer to the more liberal streams of Judaism. By and large, they don't see the Bible as a divine document. Their faith in God is not what I just described. It's not that sort of traditional faith in God. And that's why the stereotype of Jews being on the political left and being more progressive in their views, being more liberal in their views, is an accurate stereotype for America. But it does not describe Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews are much more in line in our value system with conservative Bible-believing Christians. And politically, Orthodox Jews vote Republican. And while it's not, the percentages aren't as high as the number of evangelical Christians who vote Republican, it's getting there. Orthodox Jews are very quickly moving in that direction, politically. So one of the things that I discovered when I first got involved in this stuff is that, I would meet Christians. I remember I'll tell you a story. The first trip I ever took in America, and I travel a lot. So I travel about 8 or 9 times a year from Israel to the U.S. I visit different churches, visit Christian seminaries, I speak, build relationships with people, use the people who I'm in relationships with to get to people who I'm not yet in relationships with and bring them in. And then there's organizations that I'm connected to where, I try to plug people into the various programs that I'm connected to and kind of be involved in this relationship with Israel and expand their view of it. That's kind of what I do. So the very first trip I ever took to go visit churches, first time I was ever in a church, I went to South Dakota. First time I ever visited a church was in South Dakota. And so in the morning I spoke at a church in Sioux Falls, and then I drove to Mitchell, South Dakota, home of the famous Corn Palace. And
You have to take Gus there and go.
and I spoke at a church there. Spoke at a church in Mitchell, South Dakota. So it was my first, basically it's my first day on the job, meaning I'd already done some Jewish-Christian relations things in Israel, speaking at a few small events, but this was my first time really getting out there, interfacing with people who'd never met a rabbi before, who'd maybe never met an Orthodox Jew before, and walking into a church, because when you're in Israel and you have people who come to Israel, they've already self-selected to the point that they're visiting Israel. But when you go out to a church, some of the people in the pews, this is just like not on their radar at all. Right. So I get out to Mitchell, and I'm a city boy from the Northeast, Jewish from the Jewish insular ghettos. This was a wild experience for me. Now it's normal, Mitchell, South Dakota. Sure, I go there all the time. But no joke. I've been there a bunch of times since. But I go out there and I give my talk. And after I give my talk, we all go down into the fellowship room, and people are having coffee and talking. And this one guy walks up to me, and he's an old guy, and he's wearing a hat that says he's a Korean War veteran. He's an old dude. And he walks up to me and he goes, "Rabbi, I got a question for you. If y'all believe in God and y'all believe in the Bible, why are so many Jews left-wing liberals?" I'll tell you what I answered him, but the big thing to me was this question, and it woke me up. Because I got into this, I was like, I'm going to promote more support for Israel, and it's going to be kumbaya. We're going to do Jewish-Christian relations, interfaith dialogue. We're going to start studying the Bible together. It's all going to be good. And then I realized that wait a second, I have a role to play here that I didn't even think about, which is that there's a lot of Christians in America who they believe in the Bible, and that's even where their support for Israel comes from. The Bible, and here's the Jewish people, the people of God, God's chosen people, and they have this biblical worldview, and then they turn around, and the Jewish community is like in favor of every progressive liberal policy that runs against that runs counter to the biblical worldview that and they're the political enemies and social cultural enemies. So how am I supposed to support the people of God, the Jewish people, if they're if the left wing of the Democratic Party is populated by the same chosen people? Like, what do I do with that? So I realized that I have a bit of a role to play here, because this guy doesn't know what an Orthodox Jew is, and that there's a whole part of the Jewish community that is, that is not progressive liberal and is not left wing and does have the same biblical values that he has. This kind of like washed over me in that moment. And I realized that it's an important part of what I do, that I just represent a different type of Judaism to a lot of Christians who've never encountered, Jews who share those viewpoints. So what I said to him was, I thought I just got to answer this quickly. This is not the type of person you can have a long conversation with. So I said to him, I don't know, man. I said, I know there's a lot of mainline Christians who kind of agree with a lot of those liberal progressive Jews. What do you say about that, Mr. Christian?
Interesting.
That's what I said to him.
Yeah.
But I was trying to send the message to him that
We're not all the same.
We're not all the same.
Yeah.
We're not all the same. It's not so simple. Anyway, that gives you a snapshot of what I do and the types of things I run into. And
yeah. So I want to ask this. So why live in Israel? Why move to Israel? People, watching are probably wondering, like, all right, you were born here in Cleveland, you're raised in Canada. why raise your kid? Like Hamas is shooting rockets at you.
Yeah,
like,
the stability. That's why. Totally.
But why move your family to that space? Is what they're thinking. I know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm stunned. First of all, in terms of safety, I'm far safer in Israel than I feel in most places in America. You read the news and you think that there's something unstable about Israel's security situation. And
I've never felt safer.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you for saying that, but that's not hyperbole.
No,
I promise you that, I feel far safer there.
Well, when I was in Israel the first time, we had the opportunity to meet Nir Barkat when he was the mayor of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little 15-minute photo op, meet and greet type deal. But one of the things that he said to us, we asked about, safety and security, because in America you get the stabbings and, you hear the different
That's all you get on the news. Yeah, you don't get.
Right?
Yeah.
And he said, well, when I travel to Washington, D.C. or Chicago, I pray to come back to the safety of Jerusalem. I know it's real great.
Right. And that was in 2016.
Yeah.
That wasn't even now when murders are skyrocketing in those places.
Yeah.
But, it's a bad idea to live in big American cities anyway these days. It's you live in a city, you should probably get out of it, because get out from under the thumb of totalitarianism. But
I told you you're gonna like it.
That's what cities are. But in any event, but yes, the question why move to Israel? I mean, that's a pretty simple answer. That's our homeland. I mean, Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, and that's not just some biblical fairy tale.
Yeah.
This is our homeland. The Jewish people have a long historical memory. We have never given up our claim to that land. We've never given up our longing for that land multiple times a day. Every single day since the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago, every Jew worldwide in their prayers prays to return to the land of Israel. We do. I mean, this is, I remember as a small child in Montreal, when I would talk about my future or think about my future with, would talk about my brothers, we would always talk about that we're going to live in Israel one day, even though there was no set plan to do so. It was just kind of, it was axiomatic, it was obvious. Of course I'm going to live in Israel. That is our homeland. I'm a Jew. That's where we belong. And, also, it's nice to be part of the majority culture. It's nice when the national holidays are the Jewish holidays, and that feels good, as a Jew. You guys don't know what it's like to be a minority where you're a Jew and you're living in America, and the big holidays that the culture is celebrating. Now, Christmas isn't necessarily a national holiday, but it functionally is. It's Christmas season, all the malls are decorated and the songs and the Christmas specials. That's a culture that's foreign to me as a Jew. When I'm, so being in the majority culture is really nice.
Yeah.
It's a nice thing, but that's not why I live there. That's just kind of icing on the cake. I live there because I am a believing Jew, and believing Jews throughout history have always wanted more than anything else to return to our land and fulfill the prophecies of that ingathering that were spoken all the way back in Deuteronomy and throughout the Bible. That there will come a time after a long exile that the people of Israel will return to our homeland and take possession of it. And that has happened in our day and age. And, that's where it's happening. I can't, I don't even, I mean, the question seems absurd to me. Why live in Israel? In terms of safety, seriously, I feel Israel is a safe place. It's a booming economy. It's a wonderful place to live. Great people.
Great food.
Great food.
Yeah.
It's a good quality of life. It's a nice, healthy first world country, growing and getting stronger economically every day.
And the technology is off the hook.
Sure, no,
really
it's just
is.
it's just like a really cool place to live, and it's beautiful, So I mean, I love living in Israel. Now, do we have the security issues of the nations around us? Sure, we live in a bad neighborhood. That's cool. That's okay. We do.
Well put.
But you know what? I think, like I served in the Israeli army. My kids serve in the Israeli army. We have mandatory draft. It's so healthy for them. I love it. I love it when my kids are in the army. Each one of them, I have 3 kids who've gone through the army so far. I have a son who's starting a sort of pre-military program that he's going into. I was telling Doug about earlier. And I can't wait till till the day he enlists, because it's so positive to learn how to fight, to learn how to defend yourself, to learn the discipline of being in the army, to understand that you have enemies who want to kill you, and they are evil, and you need to fight them. And we're right on the front lines of the battle for civilization, right there in Israel. Our enemies in Israel are no fans of the U.S. Right? I mean, basically, essentially, we're just the Middle Eastern front of the same battles we're all fighting.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me getting political, last month when Israel was under attack by Hamas, we were having all these missile attacks going on.
And I think you should tell the audience, this is not, you weren't like in the beach somewhere.
No.
Like, rockets came close to your
home. There was one rocket that landed about half a mile from my house. Right. We were in the bomb shelter and whatever. There's an air raid siren, whatever. But I promise you, we weren't afraid. Fear is it's just not, whatever. You do what you got to do. You go into the bomb shelter. Okay. And then the rocket hit. But that was only one. The truth is, the town that I live in is not really within the firing line, because we're not a densely enough populated area. And Hamas only shoots at the most densely populated areas because they want to kill people. So there are rockets fired towards Jerusalem, and there's rockets fired towards Tel Aviv. And I live in Beit Shemesh, which is a commuter town that's located kind of in between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So they didn't really fire rockets at us. There was one, I don't know if it was a stray rocket or what, but there was one rocket that landed, nearby. But having, living in a situation where you know who your enemies are, and they're clearly defined, and you have to battle them, is very, very healthy. I was just saying that. So last month when Israel was under attack, what bothered me most wasn't the fact that I had to go into a bomb shelter. What bothered me most was what happened in the U.S. Congress, where you had a lineup of representatives in the House of Representatives from the Democratic Party who got up one after the other to condemn Israel and to praise Hamas and to side with our enemies. That was astounding to me. Here, when they're siding with Hamas, Hamas is an arm of Iran. They're terrorists. The Hamas charter calls for the death of Jews and the destruction of Israel. This is a genocidal organization. And you have members of the U.S. Congress getting up and siding with Hamas and condemning Israel for fighting against these terrorists. And that's not something that we'd seen before. And the worst part of it is, look, there's always been some bad actors in political parties. But the leadership of the Democratic Party did not censure these people. It didn't condemn these people at all. Nancy Pelosi, even when pressed that maybe she should condemn some of these words, said no. She refused to. That to me was the most worrying thing. That concerns me more than the rocket that landed half a mile from my house, because in this battle for the Judeo-Christian ethos of our civilization, Israel's the tip of the spear.
Yeah.
But the U.S. is the headquarters. The U.S. is the big dog in the fight. And if the U.S. isn't in the fight with us, if the U.S. falls, then we're alone. And this is the ruling party. And they're getting up in Congress and they're praising our enemies. So when people ask me how things are in Israel, I'm like, things in Israel are fine.
Can you fix the U.S., please?
But I'm worried about what's going to happen to the U.S. I'm worried, is the U.S. still with us?
Wow.
Yep. So we had this discussion over the last couple of weeks about sort of like, and what you're talking about like makes this seem like, tame, but religion versus secularism, and addressing sort of culture and winning people back into if secularism is is still winning out over organized religion or even faith in general. we were talking last time, where fire and brimstone versus the inspiration and the sort of like the marketing that you use when you say going after the souls and saving the souls of people. Give me your take on it, where you think
how do you pitch? How do you? We got into a little bit of this earlier today. Talking about education, talking about some of the stuff like how do we win the future? Joe, I think it was Tuesday, we had this discussion, and we just talked about, so much of culture is buying into the religion of secularism. Where do we as people of faith step in and win the day and win the arguments and that sort of stuff? And I know education's a big thing for you and some other areas.
I think there's some other areas we haven't touched on, and obviously no one watching this or listening to this was privy to our conversation earlier today. So let me just fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah.
Look, it's all about the kids. It's all about who's going to win the future. And the secular left has kicked our tail for decades. They played the long game. A long time ago, they made a conquering of academia their highest priority, and they accomplished that. They pretty much own academia. But what we have today, right now, is not only that the school system is also controlled by the progressive left and the atheistic, secularistic, whatever you want to call it, worldview, but we have this convergence of progressive, atheist, left-wing ideology and big corporations that have embraced this wokeness and are pushing it through all of their apparatuses. So, for example, if you're a person of faith, you can't let your kids sit down and watch Disney, the current fare that Disney's putting out. Disney is a corporation that is in intertwined, tight partnership with the Chinese Communist Party, who is the enemy of the United States of America and the biggest threat to the United States of America. They are pushing ideologies that are antithetical to a biblical worldview, and they're pushing them aggressively through their platform. So if someone's a Christian and they just plop their kids down in front of Disney Junior, whatever the channel is called, their kids are just watching this stuff and they don't mind. Well, it's Disney, it's good for kids. Well, because it doesn't have nudity, because it doesn't have extreme violence. That's why it's good for kids. But they could teach them about transgenderism when they're 5 years old, and they could start seeping in the critical race theory and when they're little kids through their cartoons, which they're doing. So I think Christians have some very serious choices that they need to make. We've gotten very comfortable being consumers of the corporate media. Yeah. And the corporate media is not neutral. The corporate media has an ideological agenda that it is more and more forcefully every day, pushing on us. So, that's the front lines of the battle. Yeah. The front lines of the battle are school boards, what media your kids are exposed to. That's the front lines. And, and it's wishful thinking to say, oh, it'll be fine. Oh, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry. I'll bring my kids to church every Sunday. And that's going to undo everything that happened for 5 days in school. Yeah. That's going to undo everything that they watched on the corporate media. That's going to undo all of it. Right. Because of that power hour in church on Sunday morning, because there was some great, worship music. Yeah.
So what apparatus do you target to take back control from, media versus academia and so on?
Well,
I don't know. It's very powerful and it's tough to overcome.
It's a tough problem. I think first of all, you have to vote with your wallet, because these corporate media outlets are also, first and foremost, they want to make money, and they have to feel it. So, for example, when Major League Baseball makes a decision to move the All-Star game because they don't like a voter law that gets passed in the state of Georgia, I think it's incumbent, and I'm the biggest baseball fan on the planet. Okay, we could talk about that, but I'm like, my life is very simple. I have my family, I have all the work that I do and my life of faith, and I have baseball. I'm not even a fan of any other sport. Okay, it's my only hobby. Okay, is I'm a huge baseball history, baseball analysis, baseball fan. People ask me what team I follow. The answer is all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm the biggest baseball fan on the planet. I'm not watching the All-Star game this year. I'm not going to vote for a player in the All-Star game.
Oh.
And I think that it has to be boycotted. Every person of faith has to not watch it. It has to get the lowest ratings it's ever gotten. And thank God the NBA, when they went on that ridiculous woke rampage last year, putting left-wing progressive slogans on their jerseys, they had the worst ratings they've ever had. Thank God. Good. That's what has to happen. They have to feel it in the pocketbook. It has to be not worth it for them to put this stuff forward. So when Disney starts putting more and more of this dangerous material on TV, people have to cancel their Disney subscription.
See, I feel that kind of stuff is very short term.
Why is it short term?
Well, because it works for a little while. Coca-Cola changes their thing, and then they recover, but somebody else takes their place and does the same thing. So it's like whack-a-mole.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. I guess the long play is the school boards. You got we've been asleep at the wheel. People have to go in there and get out of your comfort zone. Go into a place where the people there do not want you, which only underscores why it's important that you're there.
Right.
And just these are public servants. The public school system belongs to the voters.
Yep.
It doesn't belong to progressive teachers unions, and it doesn't belong to the school board. And parents have to take control. I was saying this earlier to Doug and to another pastor we were talking to. People have to view that as part of the tuition that they pay. Send your kid to public school, you don't have to pay tuition, right? No, you have to pay a tuition. It's a tuition of time.
Yeah.
And that time is that you are going to go to the school board, you are going to let your voice be heard about what they're teaching in the classroom. And if it's and if everyone did that, if every person of faith did that, the curriculum in the schools would look different. So look, we have to fight the battle we also have to fight it on the big political stage. You have to vote for the right candidates. People of faith do not like getting involved in politics. But it's not just like people of faith stay away from politics. It's that people on the left who are atheists, their religion is politics. They're much more involved in it. And people who are people of faith often are like, I go to church and I'm worried about my business and I'm worried about raising my family, because they raise families more than people on the left do. And they're more entrepreneurial than people on the left are. So the culture of people on the right is that they don't get involved as much, and they essentially cede the territory. What I always say to people, people of faith is, if you don't want to people of faith don't want to get involved in politics, there are plenty of people who disagree with you who are happy to get involved in politics.
Yep.
And they will take away everything that you care about. So, I think we have to not underestimate the small politics, the small local politics. There's still in America a lot of local power. But this doesn't solve the problem of what your kids are exposed to and the value system that our kids are raised with. I think parents need to, be more aggressive about, filtering what their kids are exposed to. And I include myself in this. It's not,
and what we were talking about, like the generations previous, they were willing to give their life for the liberty, right? They were fighters.
And we started talking about the founding of America, and he just got back from Boston and got to see John Hancock's place and some of these things, and it was super inspiring. But, you think a lot of these guys left the revolution broke. Like they went into seceding from England, starting this country. And I said, the sacrifice of World War II and the sacrifice of some of these people, and you think about that today. I heard this story recently from a missionary at our network conference from India, and India is going through a horrible bout with COVID. They don't have any of the PPE, or they don't have any of the oxygen they need, or any of that stuff, and people are dying all over the place. And there are Christians that have said, I know I'm going to get COVID and I'm probably going to die, but I'm going to go and pray with these people in the hospital. It was so inspiring, and the way that I'm not doing the story justice. The missionary was sharing obviously very firsthand accounts, but these people recognizing the risk to themselves and still going, hey, this person deserves dignity. Will they die? They deserve to have somebody there holding their hand, so on and so forth, even though it may cost me my life.
Right.
And those things are super inspiring. And one of the things we were talking about, now you mentioned the word comfort earlier. I just think we're so comfortable that we're okay to stay where we're at. We're okay to set, well, school takes the kids off my hands. Disney Plus takes the kids off my hands. We're so comfortable advocating responsibility and leadership to everybody else. Well, they're the professionals. They'll teach them math and science and reading and all that stuff.
Well, it's also because we just think that it's all going to be fine. Don't worry, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Everything will be fine. Everything. Why? America's changing, and it's changing fast. And the people who are changing it have a plan that they're implementing. And if patriotic Americans who have faith in God do not stand up and roll up their sleeves and embrace this challenge, then we're going to lose it. We're going to lose what America is. It'll still have the name America, but we're going to lose what America is. And no one's going to parachute in and save us from this. People have to be willing to, to get out of their comfort zone. It's like you're saying, when you look back at the greatest generation of World War II, and you look back at, people who fought in the Revolutionary War, and or even, some other time periods in between, and we wonder to ourselves, because we've all been raised in world, we haven't really been challenged in that kind of way.
Right. Yeah.
And you kind of wonder wow, what would I do at that time? Would I give my life? Okay, well, don't expect our battle to look like their battle. Don't wait until they say, well, are you willing to pick up a gun and run to the top of the hill? That's not going to happen. This is what the war looks like. Yeah. This is high tech time. This is the time of mass media. This is what a war looks like in 2021. Are you fighting?
Yeah.
Are you awake? Are you paying attention? I think the first step is getting off of mainstream media and actually paying attention through alternative media sources that are in line with your value system. Christians need to start following politics. I hate to say it. Start following. A lot of people don't even know. They don't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
So do you think the Christian or the Jewish influences are still numerous enough to be able to fight?
Absolutely.
Against?
I think we're the majority.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we are the majority. I think, this is still what this country is. It's not only that we're the majority. A lot of the people who aren't traditionally part of what we view as our community
still have those
values, and they're willing. And that's why there's all sorts of things happening in the Latino community, in the African American community, where you're having greater and greater numbers who are moving over to, I'm not even going to call it the Republican Party, but who are moving over to the traditional America First agenda, because it's traditional. There's, critical race theory is angering African American parents as much as it's angering white parents all over the country, if you really pay attention to what's going on. And, so I think that there's also an opportunity here for for some kind of a revival because of the backlash. I mean, in a way, I
said that Tuesday, and the rabbi just confirmed it on Thursday.
In a way, the best thing that can happen is a kind of clarification. If the left moves so far to the left and gets so aggressive that it's very clear who they are, then I think that it makes it easier for people who aren't comfortable with that to come in our direction.
And it makes strange bedfellows. Like, I find myself on multiple occasions agreeing with somebody like Bill Maher, who normally I don't agree with, and I'm like, I kind of support that. I agree with the free speech thing.
Yeah, well,
I agree with
he's one of those people.
Traditional liberal.
He's a traditional liberal, and progressives who believe in this scientism and who are who have this the identity politics woke left are not liberals. Liberals. They're not liberal. They don't believe in liberalism. They have a certain, meaning a true liberal has a certain, is dominated by a kind of live and let live attitude. Yeah. They're not live and let live. No. They're not live and let live. They don't want you to be promoting your Christian faith in your community. They're opposed. Yeah. They're not liberals. Bill Maher, and there's a lot of people like him, and a lot of people in that age group like him, who are kind of torn right now, and they're not really sure where they are because they're liberals and they're traditionally liberals and they're kind of in the liberal camp, and maybe they're also, you know, joined by their hatred of the right traditionally, but they're kind of like, you know, they're being marginalized within their own camp.
Yeah, and they're staying consistent on message. Like
Right.
Jon Stewart was another one, and I'm like watching him say the same stuff, but now it's not kind to the, you know, the
Right.
real
Yeah, it's getting interesting.
Well, it reminds me of that quote from Abraham Lincoln, and he says, you know, no foreign enemy would ever be able to like cross the shores and take a drink from the Ohio, and he says, but if destruction be our lot, it'll be death by suicide.
Amen. There you go.
And that's, you know, I'll have to find that and post it later. But
such wisdom in that generation,
right? I mean, you see that he's like, you know, good luck. Come over here. You're not going to be able to make it to the Mississippi or the Ohio River. Like, we're going to kick your butts. And he's like, but if we're going to be destroyed, it's going to be our own doing.
No, I think, you know, I think parents have to not be afraid to regulate what their kids are being exposed to, and I think that's a very big problem. And I don't think it's all laziness. Like, I'll plop them in front of Disney, you know, Disney. It's also they don't want to say no.
Yeah,
it's easy and it's good stuff. It's entertaining. This, you know, and so
the challenge is finding something that's not that, because of how wide
it is. It is a problem. It is a problem.
Yeah. Well, and I know you're a big proponent too, if you're not going to be on the school board and stuff like that, of either homeschooling or private education. I know your wife teaches kindergarten in public school, but your son goes to private school, and so that, you know, there's dimensions in all of this, and
it's a thorny problem. You know, I'm kind of like, it's more like I'm like 60-40 in favor of disengaging, but I also understand that we can't just abandon the public school system.
Yeah.
It needs to be reformed, but to what, you know, how much do you want to sacrifice your kids on that altar? I mean, because the public school system it's not the public. Did you go to public school?
I did.
So what they're teaching in public school today is not what they were teaching you then. I mean, you know, so, and that's something that people have to realize, that because a lot of people are like, well, I went to public school. If it was fine for me, it's fine for my kid. Time out. Your kid's not going to the public school you went to.
Yeah.
You know, the teachers you had and the curriculum you had is not what they have. Yeah. So they're not going to, if it was good enough for me, it was good enough for them. What you had, they don't have. That's an important realization people have to make. I think a lot of these battles can be won through politics, because once the power shifts back into the hands of patriotic, traditional American values, I think a lot of these things will end up getting solved. It might get really nasty. Who knows how nasty it's going to get? You know, what we've seen in the last 6 months makes us realize that the other side is not going to go down without a fight, and they still control the levers of power. So, you know,
when you take someone like Mitt Romney and and you take, you know, kind souls that aren't made of like mud, like, you know, like Trump was, they get decimated in the process. How do you convince someone of good nature to enter something that's so vile?
Well, that's why you need someone like Trump.
You need somebody who's a swamp thing.
Because Trump's everything distasteful about Donald Trump is also part of what made him able to be the disruptor that he is. Because you have to have a huge dose of I don't care,
right,
in order to be Donald Trump. But that same huge dose of I don't care also makes him say things that make us all cringe.
Well, that's how, you know, if
you have to be.
He can survive the process, but to carry the banner of principle is a tough thing. So he might get you there, but you know, he's a little bit more radioactive than his, you know.
No, but that's why that's why the voice of the American people has to be really heard. Because if all you do is watch mainstream media, then as someone with traditional values, you think that you're in the minority. But we're not really in the minority.
Right.
We're not. That's a lie. We're not in the minority. We're not in control. We're not in control of the corporate media. We're not in control of the levers of power. We're not in control of the security state that's now being weaponized against American patriots. We're not in control of those levers of power. But there's more of us. You know, and look, here's an interesting little data point. If you take a look at all elected officials across the country, meaning you add up, let's say just all the state houses, all the state senates, all the state houses, and take a look at how many Republicans there are and how many Democrats there are. Include the Congress and the Senate in DC. Okay, so you have add them all up. I don't have the number in front of me. If you look this up, you'll see that this country is overwhelmingly Republican. It's not close. The number of state houses that are Republican versus Democrat it's huge. I don't know. I didn't know we were going to. I didn't plan the conversation. We could look it up. I don't know if you have an ability to look it up on the spot, but if you look it up, you'll see that the number of state houses that are dominated by Republicans and how much they're dominated by. If you just add up the total number of seats. Now I know where to look it up. Do we have a minute? Can I look this up?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, it's worth looking up because it's kind of like give you hope. Hold on a second. Let's find this. I know where to find it.
And I think that's true, though. Most of what I find, most people are center right on the political spectrum. They just want, people to stay out of their lives. They want to be able to live. They don't want to be burdened down. Most people are not overtly political. And so, but most people are slightly right, and they just want to be left alone. And
right.
that's my biggest thing.
That exact sentiment in what you said are the ingredients of the problem of people on the right getting less involved in politics, because meaning the same inclination that makes a person more about liberty and less about government involvement makes them shy away from political involvement. People on the left who believe in big government and are more authoritarian also they by definition care more about politics. And this is where there has to be this kind of shift where it's okay to not care about politics. I said last night that I didn't follow politics for years. You'd think I'm a very political person because of the way I'm talking, because we just met. For years, for decades, I never read the news. I don't follow. My attitude was, if something's important enough, I'll find out about it. But over the last 2 years, that's changed. Over the last 2 years, I was like, I'm going to start paying attention, because right now we're in a historical inflection point. And there hasn't been one like this in my lifetime. So I'm going to start paying attention. I started paying attention. This is all new. By the way, again, I wasn't a very political person before. I'm going to take a look. I think this is where it is.
Now, I probably know more people who may have had sort of like a political leaning, but it was very neutral. Right. And now they're politically agnostic because they're afraid to share what they believe in. Because
cancel culture has
it took people's voices away, and they would rather not partake than to get themselves in foul territory.
Here we go.
And I'm sure even you probably don't pay attention to the news as much as you once did, or do you? You're still there. You're still.
I listen to Mr. Shapiro every day, and I think I enjoy the guys at Daily Wire. There are a few others. Rabbi's made a few recommendations to me of some spots where I should, turn my.
And that's an interesting model too, where that he did like retract from all traditional things, and it's all incorporated in his wheelhouse under that control, and see if he can do entertainment. See if he can do.
Okay, so listen to this.
Yes.
State senates. So there's 50 of them. 32 are Republican, 18 are Democrat. Okay. State houses. Hold on. 29 are Republican, 19 are Democrat, 1 is a power sharing. These are not close.
Right.
These are just not close at all.
No.
So if you look at it from that perspective, like just look at the sweep of America, the American people are conservative. The American people are by and large people of faith. But we're not politically, our side isn't as politically organized. We're not as politically involved.
We're more worried about our families and going to work and
God we're just not, and we don't fight those battles the way they do.
We don't need politics for our identity, where the other side of that does.
That is their identity. That's their religion. That is what they're involved with. Yeah. So, the time has come. I'm cool with people not being involved politically generally, but right now we're in a time of war. Right now we're in a time of battle, and it's time for people to engage themselves in it and get out of their comfort zone and be involved and win this thing, because there's something going on in this country, and it's anyway.
And I really do think that you shape it with how you spend your dollars and who you end up supporting. So if instead of like a gut punch against, a boycott that's really short and
Yeah, and I understand what
term,
you're saying, that it's like these things don't really work.
but if it's sustaining, where you organize in a way of knowing who you support and what they support and being able to spend your dollars that way, then you basically use the market to be able to, to guide culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, does any of this tip for you? I know you're considering running for office. So does any of this sort of conversation push you one way or the other? Like what's going to be the deciding factor for
It's
Joe?
not going to be a conversation with me sitting here.
Well, but I know he's a problem solver, and I know he likes to be inspired, and I know I'm watching his facial, and I've sat and had enough conversations with him. I know he's eating this up in a good way.
For sure.
And so what for you, him saying, hey, we need people of faith that are going to, bring us back to those traditional values and all that stuff. What's the...
All right, so I kind of shared my recipe for this like a couple months ago, and I have to figure out whether or not I can be more effective inside the system or outside the system.
Right.
If I'm better off out here cheering on someone who can do the job better, then that's where I'm going to stay. So, I mean, a lot has to do with fundraising and support and stepping on toes, but I really want to know if I can get anything done. If I'm going to just be another guy that goes there and gets frustrated because I can't do anything, I'm going to bail out and not partake.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Well, let's do this. Let's switch gears here for the last little bit. You're a baseball fan.
Absolutely.
With no baseball team.
Correct.
So explain that.
Well, so I mentioned earlier that I was raised in Montreal. So when I was a kid growing up in the late 70s and 80s, I was a Montreal Expos fan. Now, the Montreal Expos no longer exist. The franchise was purchased and moved to Washington, became the Washington Nationals. So there are some Expos fans that became Nationals fans. My brother's one of them, but that's not for me. Like, this is my team left; they're gone. They don't exist anymore. I do have some affinity for the Nationals just because of that, but it's not the same. So sometimes people say to me, "Well, why don't you just pick a new team?" I tried that for a while when I met my wife. The Expos were still in Montreal when I met my wife, but it was kind of winding down. They were on the. Everyone knew that the franchise was not being well managed and was going to be sold. So I started kind of rooting for the Red Sox because she's from Boston, but it's not the same. You can't create a sports allegiance, when you're 51 years old. And even if I did, let's say I started rooting for a team and they won the World Series, would I feel that burst of joy that you have when your childhood team wins the World Series? There's no way. It would never be there.
I cried when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. I was wild.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That was a great team.
Yeah, it was
a cool team.
Exciting. We beat Tom Brady. It was wonderful.
Fine.
So you're just a fan of baseball in general. So you have some favorites, I'm assuming.
No, yeah. So, I love the sport. I mean, I love baseball. I follow all the teams very closely. So generally, because of the way I follow it, I will like or not like certain teams based on what they're doing as a franchise. How are they building their team? And if they're making the types of moves that I think are interesting or
playing it
or
safe,
smart, then I'll want to see that succeed. If they're taking a route that I think that I disagree with, I'll kind of want to see them fail, because or something along those lines. I love baseball. I follow it closely. I'm on the edge of my seat watching the games.
Can I ask you a question then?
Sure.
All right. So this is well, let me first just ask it. So the seasons where we have way more no-hitters in games are terrible for regular fans who like to see action and home runs and stuff. Is the defensive baseball killing the sport, or will have ill effects on it?
It's a big problem right now in baseball. Let's put this another way. Forget about the number of no-hitters. The batting average across the league in baseball, meaning the league-wide batting average, is, if it stays where it is right now till the end of the season, it will be the lowest single-season league-wide batting average in baseball history, period. Up until this point, the lowest league-wide batting average ever was 1968, which is often called the year of the pitcher. Some of the most extreme pitching seasons happened in 1968. 1972 was close to it. It was also an extreme pitching season, but not quite to the level of 1968. This year, from a batting average perspective, is is the worst ever for the hitters. The reason that offense in general is still higher than 1968 and the early 70s is that so many of the hits are home runs. So that's kind of like keeping offense afloat. But the problem with that is this. The problem with that is that the number of strikeouts is skyrocketing. Not just going up, skyrocketing. There's now more than a strikeout per inning in baseball. And if you go back only 5 years or so, it was below 8 per 9 innings, and now it's above 9 per 9 innings. That's really fast in a short period of time. So with the increased strikeouts, and it's very, very difficult to hit, what you have is just like this lack of action. Exactly what you're saying. Exactly. So it's very nice that runs are still being scored because the ball gets hit out of the park. But a home run is an exciting event, but not when
there's no drama to it.
There's no drama to it. There's no buildup. There's no tension. It just kind of happens. It's cool to see people hit homers, but it doesn't. It's actually a big problem. Now, that said, Major League Baseball is doing the right things. Theo Epstein, who was the general manager first of the Red Sox and then of the Cubs recently, is now working for the league office, and his job is to investigate ways to improve the product on the field. And I heard an interview with him recently where he was speaking specifically about this problem, and they are looking at potential solutions for these issues, including things that might sound very radical to people, but I think would be worth trying, like moving the mound back a few inches, possibly, which might swing the advantage back to the hitters.
To 61 feet or something like that. It's
now 60 feet 6 inches. They're toying with different ideas. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what they're going to settle on, but they are, or maybe changing the ball. They're not sure what they're going to do, but something has to change.
Yeah, the pitchers are stronger. They're throwing faster, so you have to like handicap it almost.
Right. In other words, pitching, the advantage has swung a little too far towards pitching, and it's not good for the game.
Yeah.
And people who are, baseball is plagued more than other sports by a cult of traditionalism. Mm. And what I mean by that is, as much as I'm like I told you, I'm a huge baseball fan. I have expertise in baseball history, but I'm not a traditionalist, which is rare. Most people who are really into like baseball history are also like, they still think the DH is an abomination. Like, and it's not the way I think at all. We should not be afraid. Baseball fans should not be afraid of changes to the rules. These aren't the 10 Commandments that came down from Sinai. First of all, in the early years of baseball, they were constantly tweaking the rules until they got the right balance. That's exactly the point.
Right.
They were tweaking the rules till they got the right balance. The balance is off right now. We need a tweak in the rules, not to change the game. A tweak in the rules at this point won't change the game. It will restore the game to what it's supposed to be. And so that's how, so fans need to be on board with the fact that there's going to be some changes coming, hopefully, that are going to swing this back. But the reason for the increase in homers, sometimes cynical people who don't really understand the mechanics of the game look at it and say, oh, all the players are trying to do is hit home runs. They're just swinging for the fences. This isn't your beer league softball game. You can't hit a 98 mile an hour fastball or a 90 mile an hour slider and say, I'm going to swing for the fences. It's very hard to make contact. It's really hard to make. It gets harder and harder to make contact. And it's not because of the fastballs, by the way. It's not because everyone's throwing so hard. Velocity is up. That's part of it. But what we've seen in the last few years, increasing every single year, is the number of sliders that are thrown and a decrease in the number of fastballs. So while velocity totally has gone up because of how strong, and it's not just how strong they are, it's also there's all this advanced technology. When pitchers in the offseason are going to these laboratories where they're looking with all sorts of advanced technology at every muscle in their body and how it's moving, and they're tweaking their motion in ways that suddenly add a couple miles an hour to their fastball, things that they have access to. Now, hitters also have access to technology, but as it is right now, and we don't know if it'll change, the technology for the pitchers is ahead of the technology for the hitters. Pitchers have the advantage, and it's getting worse, not better in terms of that advantage. So it's really, really hard to hit. So what do the hitters do? So the hitters are like, I'm going to try to perfect my swing. It's so hard to hit. I'm going to perfect my swing so that when I do get lucky enough that I make contact, it goes.
Yep.
So that's why. So you have this dynamic where strikeouts are up, not because strikeouts are up because the hitters are undisciplined. No, the hitters are extremely disciplined. The number of pitches per plate appearance has gone up to its highest ever. Why? Because the hitters are very disciplined. They know how to lay off pitches. They know which pitches to try to swing at. But it's really hard to hit. But their swings are so perfected that when they do make contact, it flies out of the park. So that's the dynamic you have here. It's not that fun a game to watch anymore. That's the problem. I love baseball more than anybody. There's parts of it that are fun, and I love watching good pitching, but it kind of gets silly when everyone strikes out 10, 12 guys per game. So I agree with you. This is a bit of a problem.
We take our employees up to the Indians games and just to hang out and whatever. And the last one we went to was a no-hitter, and it was the worst experience of my life to watch a no-hitter game. It's so boring. Like nothing happened.
You know, no-hitters are only fun to watch on TV. Because the truth is, when you go to a ball game, unless you're one of the half a dozen people who's sitting right behind home plate at field level, you can't actually see the pitcher. Baseball's a funny sport where you can watch it. Your ability to watch it well live is less than your ability to watch it well on TV.
Right.
Which is not true, let's say, of hockey.
Mm-hmm.
Hockey is a perfect example of a sport that when you watch a hockey game live and you can see the entire ice and how they're all moving, it's a much better sport to watch live than it is on television, where you're only seeing the players with the puck or the players in the shot. But baseball, when you're sitting along the third baseline, even if you're at field level, can you tell if the pitch was outside or inside, or if it was a curveball? It moves so fast. If it was a slider, but the angles that they use when you watch it on TV make it that watching pitching can be entertaining if it's on television. Watching it live doesn't work.
Right.
So it could be that same game, had you watched it on TV, it might have been really cool.
I need the ESPN graphic to show me where it
exactly,
hit.
but then also you're seeing like wow, what a great pitch, the way it nipped the corner. You can't tell that when you're at a game live. Yeah. The ball was just inside the zone, and he painted the corner and got the guy on that great pitch. So yeah, but when you're watching live, a triple's great.
Yeah,
a stolen base is great.
Exactly.
A great defensive play is great. If the ball's not being put in play, there's less defense being played.
Yeah,
everyone's striking out. It's a problem.
I think the average baseball game, I saw the statistic on TikTok, so we know that it's true.
Absolutely.
It only sees 15 to 17 minutes of action in an actual game of baseball.
Well, that's another problem with baseball games, is that they're getting longer.
Yeah.
And that's because of the amount of time. It's attributable. There's all sorts of things that people say make the game take long. Oh, all the pitching changes. That's nonsense. Pitching changes don't really add to the length of a game. It's so tiny. And they tried to make a new rule to limit pitching changes or how many mound visits you can make. That's not where the game gets long. There's only one thing that Major League Baseball can do to shorten the length of games, and they could do it easily, and they haven't done it yet. And that is to institute a pitch clock. In the same way that basketball has a shot clock and football has a play clock, you institute a 20-second pitch clock, which is already in use throughout the minor leagues, which means that all these pitchers pitching in the majors have all played with a pitch clock when they were minor leaguers, but they haven't instituted it in Major League Baseball. And the average time between pitches in Major League Baseball is 35 seconds right now. That's the average time. There are pitchers who wait well over a minute between pitches. Yeah. And like once I say that, you realize like when you're watching a ball game, a lot of time you're just watching nothing.
Yeah.
And that's because of the length of time. It's not only the pitchers, it's also the hitters. They're stepping out of the box and they're adjusting their batting gloves and they're taking a deep breath, and like they're both at fault.
And it's that psychological chess match between the two.
Fine. It could be that with runners on base, you have to maybe you don't use the pitch clock because you have to let the pitcher have the opportunity to upset the hitter's timing. Sure. But I calculated that if they instituted a 20-second pitch clock, just that one move itself would shorten the average length of a game by between 15 minutes and 25 minutes. That's significant.
Yeah. The
average game will get shortened that way. So, yeah, we keep talking about baseball. If anyone's interested, if any of your listeners are interested,
I was going to say,
I have a podcast about baseball. It's really, I'm going to warn everyone, it's really, you have to be a very serious fan if you're into sabermetrics. If you don't know what sabermetrics are, don't listen to my podcast because if you don't even know that term, you won't even enjoy it. My podcast it's called The Baseball Rabbi, which is kind of a gimmicky name because I happen to be a rabbi. we don't talk. It's not like we talk about Judaism or anything of Jewish content. It's
Yeah.
purely, in-depth baseball analysis for serious fans. So if you're the type of person who reads fan graphs, you're the type of person who's into sabermetrics, who's into advanced metrics, and is into baseball history. We do a lot of history on the podcast as well, besides the advanced stat stuff. You'll love our podcast. So we're in, I think, our third or fourth season. I have a hard time remembering. I think it's our third season.
So is it like the analytics side? Okay.
Exactly. It's analytics, but we also get into the sort of the politics of the sport, meaning internally in the sport, like when there's scandals or issues, or meaning it's really about whatever's going on in baseball. But we also will have some episodes that we do that are historical analysis, but always with an original angle on them. And we also have interviews. We've interviewed some great players, some retired stars.
Next time he's in town, we'll have to have him do Justin's show and talk.
Yeah, for sure. That would be a really good.
No, sure.
He does the.
You guys would tangle very well.
Oh, wonderful! Because look, I follow all the teams very closely. I could talk about any team as a local, so I'd be happy to talk about the.
Yeah, very cool.
Have my take on it. So I mean, some of the players that we've interviewed over the last few years. You remember Fred Lynn? From the 70s. So you're not really a baseball fan. Anyway, so he was a superstar. He was a big star back in the 70s and 80s. We interviewed him. We interviewed Louis Tiant.
But my first player that I followed was Andre Thornton for the Indians, and that was in the 80s. So that was my.
I remember Andre Thornton.
Yep.
Okay.
Thunder.
That's right.
Were you just a fan growing up, or did you play baseball?
I didn't play baseball. I just played a little bit with friends in the park
Right.
and stuff. I never played organized baseball in any way. My dream as a kid wasn't to be a baseball player. My dream was to be a manager. That was where my head was. But I was obsessed with baseball from the beginning. Meaning as a 7-year-old, I'm already immersed in it. So this has been a lifelong passion, and it's just never abated. When I was younger, I was also a fan of other sports, and I was just like a crazy sports fan. But baseball was still number one. And most people, as they get older, their interest in sports kind of wanes when everything else in life takes over. For me, it was a little different. As I got older, and I was like, okay, I don't have time for all the sports anymore. I'm just dropping everything and focusing on baseball. So. But it's also I was already so deeply into it. I have a whole library of baseball books, and it's just something that it's become more than being a fan. Like I said, it's like a very serious
following
hobby.
all the sports. That's a big time investment.
A lot of people follow all the sports.
Yeah,
and so when I was a kid, I did.
Sure.
Especially in my college years.
Well, I have one final question, and we'll wrap up here. So I'm setting Joe up. So he doesn't know it, though.
Okay.
So why should Joe go to Israel?
Why should Joe go to Israel?
Yeah.
Why should I go to Israel?
So I've been inviting him, and he hasn't been yet.
Do you want to go to Israel?
I love seeing places. I love the history.
He does.
So I think it would be perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So we're done.
All right. No,
but why should you go? No, but honestly, why should you go to Israel?
Yeah.
Look, Israel is in many ways the epicenter of the world. And you realize that when you're there, because like you say, oh, you love the history, but Israel's not a museum.
Yep.
And you'll go there, you'll see a lot of amazing history, like incredible history. But you'll also see an incredible modern high-tech society built in the Middle East in a short amount of time with everything up against it.
Yeah.
You'll also, you're in. Like when you think about politically where Israel is and what Israel is, it's a very exciting place. It's beautiful. The people are great. Got great beaches. I mean, we have all that stuff too. The natural beauty is there. It's just a very exciting place. It's a very exciting place to live, and people who visit there, you feel like there's this energy there from the second you get off the plane.
Yep.
Well, answer this. So you guys have both been there, and what's most impressive is that everyone that goes there has the experience where they connect to the place and they're overwhelmed, they're overcome.
Everyone, right? Have you ever met someone who went to Israel and wasn't like, whoa, it changed me, right?
Yeah.
And they don't say that necessarily when they go to France on vacation.
Right. You can see ruins anywhere.
No,
I picture when you go revolution and you say this big massive battle and then people connect with the loss of life, or it's an emotional connection. It's not like that.
It's different.
And
Ezekiel 37.
Even what you're describing here, when people go on vacation to other places, they don't come back with those same adjectives that they come back with when they visit Israel.
And they all describe it as something that's hard to put into words.
It's hard to put in exactly. the stereotype is that the main topic of conversation when people are on the plane at the end of their trip coming home from Israel is trying to figure out when they're coming back.
Yep.
Okay.
It's just like
Absolutely.
that's what you're thinking about as you're leaving. It's like, okay, when am I going to get back here? How can I work this out? When could I do it? It's look, if you're a person of biblical faith, then it's exponential, the effect that it has, because you get there and there's this, again, the combination of the ancient biblical sites where you're going somewhere and it's not a recreation.
Right.
It's the actual place, the actual structure. You walk into the actual building where something happened.
Well, is it that connection where you read about these places in scripture and then you see them in real life?
And then you're there, right?
Okay.
You're there. You're in the place. Or like you go out to the Elah Valley where David killed Goliath, right?
Or the top of Mount Carmel.
Right. And you open up the Bible, and in that particular battle, at the beginning of that chapter in the book of Samuel, it describes the layout of the topography. It describes where the Philistines were and where the Israelites were. And you stand up there and you look at it and you're like, this is the spot. This is where it happened. And you're standing there, and the whole thing, like the Bible just comes to life. But at the same time, you then get back on the bus and go to Tel Aviv, into a bustling city filled with Jews who have been ingathered from the four corners of the earth, exactly as the Bible foretold it. Let me just get biblical for a minute.
Okay.
When Moses, at the end of his life, in the end of Deuteronomy, gets up there and he says to the people of Israel, in the future you're going to sin, and as a result of your sins, you're going to get exiled. You're going to get scattered. It doesn't just say exiled. He says scattered. You're going to get scattered to the four corners of the earth. And then he says it's going to go on for a long time. He uses this phrase in Deuteronomy 29 after describing all the suffering and the exile. And he talks about the last generation. Most of the Christian translations just say a later generation, but they're kind of sugarcoating it. He actually talks about it's going to come sometime in the future, way in the future. Now, last generation, the Hebrew word for generation, really just means era. Sometime way in the future, you're then going to come back to the land. You're going to get ingathered into the land, and you're going to become more numerous and more prosperous than your ancestors in the land. If you were there 3,300 and something years ago when Moses was saying this, you would think he was either just speaking hyperbole and exaggeration, or that he was crazy. Because in the ancient world, there were lots and lots of nations that were conquered and sent into exile. That was actually a pretty normal thing in the ancient world, because that's what empires would do. Or a stronger nation would conquer a smaller nation. And if you conquer a smaller nation, the last thing you want to do is keep them all there and try to rule over them, because it's their indigenous homeland and you're an outsider ruling over them. They're just going to continually try to overthrow you. So what you do, and this is what all the empires did, you kill off the leadership, and then you scatter the people into exile. So if I conquer that nation and that nation, so I take some of the people from there and bring them here. I take some of the people from here and bring them there, and some of the people from that nation I conquered and I bring them here, and I mix them all up, teach them my language, and that's how nations would disappear. And that's why you don't know anyone who identifies as a Chaldean or as an Akkadian or as a Phoenician or a Philistine. Those ancient nations that you read about in the Bible don't exist anymore. What does it mean that they don't exist anymore? Everyone alive today is the direct descendant of someone from the ancient world, right? But you just don't identify as the direct descendants of someone from the ancient world. What happened? How come you don't identify as someone from the ancient, as the direct descendant of anyone from 3,000 years ago? Because people moved around and they lost those identities.
Right.
It was just normal. No one ever came back from exile. There is no example in history of a nation being scattered into exile. Again, scattered. Not all sent to one place where it's kind of easy to come back after a short period of time. We're talking about scattered. Here's a nation, and earlier in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses says to the people of Israel that you are the smallest of all nations, which we are. The Jewish people today, we make a lot of noise, so people think there's a lot more of us than there are. the Jewish people today are less than half of 1% of the Earth's population. Less than half of 1%. Which means statistically, if you do any work in statistics, it means we kind of don't exist. We don't make it onto the graphs.
Right.
Okay?
Or yeah, a little sliver.
No, whatever. It's less than half of 1%. That's
that's
not
not
even. It's not. It's not within the margin of error that you count it.
Okay.
Okay? We don't exist. Okay? So he says you're going to be a tiny people. You're going to get exiled, scattered for a long time, and then you're going to come back. It's like, excuse me, Moses. What are you talking about? Who's going to come back? No one comes back. You get assimilated, you get lost. We did. And we know exactly who we are. There are records of Jewish scholarship, Jewish writing, letters, books from every generation going all the way back to when we were exiled 2,000 years ago. It's not like we were lost and now we're claiming we're the Jews. Like, we know exactly who we are.
Right.
We returned. This is a miracle. I mean, it's a miracle in the sense, in the very plainest definition of a miracle. What's a miracle? A miracle is a deviation from the laws of nature for God's purposes. It's a good definition of miracle, right? A deviation from the laws of nature for God's purposes. The ingathering of the Jewish people in the 20th century, in the 19th century, and 20th century, en masse, from every nook and cranny on planet Earth, back to the land of Israel, where we have become more numerous and more prosperous than our ancestors, exactly as foretold in Deuteronomy 30, is a violation of the laws of history. An extreme violation of the laws of history. It makes no sense. And academic historians have pointed this out. Jewish history it makes no sense. It breaks all the rules of history. It's miraculous. It would be miraculous even if Moses hadn't gone out on a limb and foretold it. The fact that he, it's one thing for something that's completely anomalous to happen. It's another thing for someone to say before it happens that it's going to happen, and then it happens.
Yeah.
So at the same time as you're going around Israel and you're seeing, ancient sites, and you can walk into a building, if you're a Christian, you walk into a building where Jesus walked, and it's not like this is approximately the place. No, you're in a building and you're standing on the same stones on the floor, and here's the walls, and this is a building that he was in. Okay? So it's not only things like that, but then it's also like, wait a second, this is the ingathered people of Israel to their land, more numerous and more prosperous than their ancestors, taking possession of the land after a lengthy exile. Whoa, that's in the scripture. I'm here. But then you have to look at yourself in the mirror, because in those prophecies of the return, in those same prophecies of the return, like in Zechariah chapter 8, it talks about there's going to come a time when normal life, people are going to return to Jerusalem, and there'll be old men and old women sitting there with their canes and children playing in the streets, and regular life is going to return to Jerusalem as the people of Israel are ingathered. And then Zechariah says, and at that time, there will be many people, multitudes from great nations, who will travel to Jerusalem to worship the God of Israel in Jerusalem. So, who are those people? Who are the many people from great nations, from other nations who aren't from the nation of Israel, who are coming to the land of Israel to worship the God of Israel at the same time as it has been rebuilt by the ingathered people of Israel? Well, that's you. Yep. So it's not just that you're witnessing prophecy, you're participating in it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You become the person Zechariah was talking about. Yeah. Because the Bible doesn't just have stories about the past. Yeah. It also has stories about the future. The stories about the past have people's names because those stories happened already, right? So it says, Joseph and Moses and whoever. The stories about the future just say things like people will come. The member some member of the children of Israel who was crossing the Red Sea when it split didn't say to himself, "Hey man, I'm in the Bible." Like this is cool. I'm in a biblical miracle. He didn't think that way, and we don't think that way either. But we are. Yep. This is biblical times. Because again, the Bible's not just about the past; it's also about the future. The future's now. So when you asked me earlier, why do I live in Israel? It's just like an absurd question. This is the epicenter of where it's all happening. This is where it all is. And the fact that the greatest enemies of Western civilization despise Israel. Those who hate Israel hate America. Kind of goes together. Mm-hmm. The fact that like their number one target is Israel, it's perfect. It's the way it's supposed to be. I don't bemoan that. Of course, if the most evil people in the world, their number one object of their hatred, Iran's number one object of their hatred is Israel. I wouldn't have it any other way. What does that say about us?
Yeah.
That's pretty good. If the most evil people in the world hate your guts, you're probably doing something right. Yeah. So anyway, so you got to come to Israel. And when you come to Israel, I'll show you around. We'll hang out.
Yeah. I knew he'd make a better pitch than I've ever
made.
Well,
we'll do the podcast from Jerusalem.
Okay. I'm up for it. It's a write-off.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. You're working. That's
right. The first time I ever heard him share that Zechariah 8 passage, I was sitting in Tel Aviv leading my first trip. And he comes into the room our first night and shares that. And I'm in the back like, man, it's getting dusty. I'm participating in prophecy. This is so cool. And I'm literally the whole trip I walked around. I'm like, I don't need to see anything else. That was the moment. And it's so powerful when you move from that space to like, I'm not just seeing history. I can go to the Colosseum and see history. I can go to the Great Wall of China and see history. But, to stand in that spot is powerful. So, well, Rabbi, thank you for being on with us. We appreciate it. We hope you have some safe travels and safe flight home.
Thank you. I loved every minute of it.
This was a lot of fun, and we'll definitely have you on again. Maybe we can do it even via Zoom. We don't have to wait as long for your travels to intersect with us. So
yeah, and if people want to listen again, Baseball Rabbi Podcast, go for it.
All right. Cool.
Awesome. We'll see you guys.
Thank you for listening to this show on Youngstown Studio. If you like our programming, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our Facebook page, or subscribe to your favorite podcast platform like iTunes or Spotify. This is original Youngstown content, and we would appreciate you sharing the videos and the word about us. Thank you.